Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is the Current Podcast.
Thanks to the progress we've made, I can say tonight that we are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong. In the meantime, discussions are ongoing. Regime change was not our goal. We never said regime change, but regime change has occurred because of all of their original leaders' death. They're all dead.
U.S. President Donald Trump addressed his nation for nearly 20 minutes last night in a speech big on rhetoric about the war against Iran, but short on details about what might be actually coming next. The president called the operation a major success. He told Americans to keep the war in perspective, saying it was much shorter than the First and Second World Wars, the Korean War, and the war in Vietnam, and suggested at the same time that the war could end through negotiations and that violence would escalate. Greg Carlstrom is The Economist's Middle East correspondent. He is in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Greg, hello.
Good morning to you, Matt.
What did you make of the president's speech last night?
There was no clarity at all in it. It was a litany of things that he's mostly said before. I mean, it sounded as if he was reading out his social media feed for 20 minutes. The timeline that he gave, this 2 or 3 week timeline, I think we can dismiss that as meaning anything. You'll remember it was almost 5 weeks ago that Trump said the war would last 4 to 5 weeks. Lately, he's been saying it might go on for another 2 or 3. We just don't know what the timeline is. And so I think, there had been some hope earlier in the week that the war might be winding down, that Trump might use this speech as an occasion to declare victory and announce a plan for America getting out. And we didn't hear any of that. And I think more likely the path is still towards further escalation, perhaps including some sort of a ground invasion of Iran.
You're there in the region. How do you think his words are being received in Iran and other neighboring countries? Words like, we're going to bomb them back into the Stone Ages where they belong.
I mean, that part in particular was received terribly, not just by Iranians in Iran, but by Iranians in the diaspora, including people who have been supportive of this war, Iranians who have thought this was, their opportunity to change the regime. Hearing Trump speak that way and then seeing Pete Hegseth, his Secretary of Defense, repeat that message about the Stone Age on social media, it went over quite badly. And I think, all of this reinforcing a feeling in Tehran that Trump is not interested in serious negotiation. That is the view of at least some people in the Iranian government, having been through this experience twice of negotiating with the U.S. Only to be attacked while in those negotiations. And I think there's a feeling amongst the Iranian leadership right now that something similar is happening where, yes, they are passing messages via Pakistan with the United States, but at the same time, there is this American military buildup continuing in the region, and again, further escalation looks likely.
The New York Times has reported that as well, that several intelligence agencies have determined that the Iranian regime is not interested at this point in negotiations. So where does that leave those talks? You have people saying that the negotiations are happening or not happening, or to your point, messages are going back and forth. But is anything happening?
Very little. I mean, right. First, they're not even talks in the traditional sense. No one is speaking directly. They're passing messages through interlocutors. And what they've done so far as any of us know, is exchange proposals for a ceasefire that are extremely far apart. The Trump administration still insisting on Iran giving up a large part of its nuclear program, accepting limits on its ballistic missiles, things like that they have demanded in the past. And then the Iranians are sticking to their own very maximalist demands around reparations for the war, closure of American military bases in the Middle East, things like that. There's not a lot of common ground. And for the Iranian regime, I think the view is still that they don't just want to end this war, they want guarantees that there will not be a future war. And for now, I think there are some people in Tehran who think the best way to ensure that is by inflicting further pain on the global economy, keeping the Strait of Hormuz closed. And so even if Trump was willing to back off for many of his demands and, offer a very simple deal, reopen the strait in exchange for sanctions relief. There are some people in Iran who don't want to do that, who want to keep going to inflict more pain on the economy.
In his speech, the president seemed to rule out a raid to capture Iran's enriched uranium. This is something that he had been thinking about previously. He told Reuters earlier yesterday that he's no longer concerned about the possible enriched uranium, which is, I think, a big change from earlier remarks in which he said that in some ways the whole reason for this war was the threat of Iran having a nuclear device imminently. Why would he change his tune on that, do you think?
Well, first, he's Donald Trump. He changes his tune all the time, and he might change it back in a couple of days. But I think if he has indeed turned against this idea of carrying out a raid to seize Iran's enriched uranium, I'm sure it's partly because of opposition from within the Pentagon and from within his own government. To do this would be extraordinarily complicated. You would have to put probably thousands of American troops on the ground in Iran for a period of days, if not a week. And this is not on the coastline or on an island in the Gulf. This is in the heart of the country. You would have to sift through the rubble of nuclear sites that were bombed by America last summer. You would have to extract more than 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, which is stored in cylinders, basically like the oxygen tanks that you would use in scuba diving. You would have to secure several dozen of those quite heavy cylinders and then fly them out of the country. And it's not even clear where you land a plane, how you get the cylinders to a plane, how you get them out. It would be one of the most complicated military operations I think that America has ever tried to pull off. And so there are people in the Trump administration, I think, warning the president that it may not work. It may result in serious American casualties. It's just too complicated.
And to your point, The Economist, your newspaper, has done polling suggesting that even Republicans are starting to sour on this war.
There's been a real shift in public opinion over the past few weeks. The majority of Americans have been against this war since it started, but there was strong Republican support when we polled about 2 weeks ago. 80%-ish supported the war of Republicans, and more than 80% supported the way Donald Trump was prosecuting that war. In 2 weeks' time, both of those numbers have dropped by double digits. Now, there's still a majority of Republicans in favor, but we're talking about mid-60s rather than 80s. So even amongst his core constituency, there has been a loss of support, and only 30% of Republicans say they are in favor of sending ground troops to Iran. So that is overwhelmingly unpopular, even with Trump's base.
Just finally, 5 weeks into this war, the oil supply is a huge concern around the world. There are reports from the FT and others that the United Kingdom has received its last shipment of jet fuel from the Middle East, that there are no guarantees of further supplies into the summer. There are shortages in parts of Asia. Prices continue to surge around the globe, including here in North America. Just briefly, how much worse could this get, do you think?
I think if this doesn't end and the strait doesn't reopen in the next couple of weeks, much worse, because what we're going to see is the world will start to draw down some of this Russian oil, for example, that's been sitting in storage that the United States has eased sanctions on. That will run out. The emergency reserves that the IEA has opened, that will start to dwindle. And then you will really see a shortage of refined product. It's not just crude oil, as you say. It's things like jet fuel, where there's a limited number of refineries in the world. Many of them are in the Gulf. And if that is cut off, you're going to see real disruptions to travel over the summer, to supplies of diesel, which will have consequences for all of the goods that we consume. This will get much worse if it doesn't end soon.
Greg, good to speak with you, and we will talk again. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
Greg Carlstrom is The Economist's Middle East correspondent. He was in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia.
Iran has been essentially decimated. The hard part is done, so it should be easy. And in any event, when this conflict is over, the strait will open up naturally. It'll just open up naturally. They're going to want to be able to sell oil because that's all they have to try and rebuild. It will resume the flowing, and the gas prices will rapidly come back down. Stock prices will rapidly go back up. They haven't come down very much, frankly.
President Trump also addressed that question of gas prices. That's something that's very much on the mind of Americans. Aaron David Miller is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment. Aaron David Miller, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you back on our program. You put on social media yesterday, I would hope 5 weeks into this war, we'd hear from the president what we should have heard on day one. What are his U.S. priorities? Why was this a war of necessity? And what's the pathway out? Anyone expecting that should lie down, wait quietly and patiently until the feeling passes. What was that speech last night?
I'm not sure. Delivered on the first night of Passover, there was almost nothing new in it. It clearly drove oil prices higher and stock markets, and certainly in Asia, lower. I think it reflects the lack of a strategy, number one. I think it reflects the bind that the administration is in, number two. There was a good deal of over-promising here, somehow that Iran would no longer be able to project its power abroad. They would lay the conditions. This was an Israeli line, but I think the Trump administration, in the wake of the Maduro grab and go in Venezuela, bought into it as well, that conditions could be laid for the fracturing and ultimately the demise of the regime, and an anticipated consequence, which anybody looking at an atlas would have realized and understood, that if the American strike, unlike June, was comprehensive, intensive, and literally designed to degrade fundamentally Iran's military capacity, then the Iranians, the adversary, would have a vote. And the vote occurred in two areas of vulnerability, which is why the Iranians have, again, back to the Atlas, they've deployed geography in a terrifying but very clear manner. They've made the future of the Gulf, security, stability, business, cultural, tourist entrepôts and hubs, they've called that into question. And they've essentially set up a toll booth in and around the straits to determine who gets through and at what price. So all of this, it seems to me, leaves the United States in an incredibly precarious position. That said, I think that if the President Trump decided tomorrow, which he won't, this has been speculated about constantly, to basically declare that the war was over, all goals were achieved, and he would unilaterally stand down. I don't think there's a constituency he cares about in this country that would do anything other than breathe a collective sigh of relief. And as a foreign policy analyst, someone who's worked for Republicans and Democrats and voted for Republicans and Democrats, that outcome, although it does constitute a strategic defeat for the United States, might be a better one than what could come.
This war, and we're just talking about this, is unpopular with many Americans. They're now paying at least $4 a gallon for gas in many states, sometimes more than that. How well of a job do you think he did in explaining to Americans why this is happening?
I think he barely touched on the issue. Every time he mentioned gas prices, he almost dismissed it. He told the Europeans we don't need their oil. We don't need the oil that comes through the Straits, so buy America, basically what he said. And then he encouraged the Europeans Iran is now weak and vulnerable, they should seize the Straits and open it up. So no, I think the affordability agenda didn't make an appearance. I think right now it's a losing argument. It appears not to make it appears unbelievably insensitive, but making it appears incredibly hypocritical. And look, this is a president whose only constraint, as he made clear to the world and to the New York Times, in the wake of the Venezuela operation, the only constraint that exists is his own morality. That which exists, quote, in his mind, unquote. And he's proven that domestically, as he's tried to effectively hollow out and degrade the institutions and norms of effective constitutional governance in this country, undermine relations with the allies, including Canada, and now, of course, take on NATO, with a frontal assault. He won't withdraw from NATO. There's a congressional NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act in 2023 that Democrats attached legislation that, in effect, you need 2/3 of the Senate or congressional or law passed. But he can hollow it out, and he does every time he attacks NATO.
What do you make of his? We just heard that comment that the Strait of Hormuz will just open naturally. He's telling allies to go, if you need jet fuel, either buy it from us or go get it yourself. He has ruled out in some ways further action to open the strait that was closed because of the war itself.
Yeah, I must say to you on this issue of ground operations, I do not, the fact that he did not refer to it, I think, at all. He didn't rule it out, didn't intimate it was coming. He said 2-3 weeks. I forget the word he used, obliterate or decimate, but I wouldn't rule out ground activity. This man is driven by 3 things: money, power, and glory. I would not rule out as part of the next several weeks. And these timelines are so artificial. It could be 6 weeks before this war winds down. And even if it does wind down, you can't just, it's not like these oil fields can be turned off and on with a switch. The Iraqis have created shut-in with these fields because they've reached storage capacity. So they've essentially shut down the pumping facilities. That is going to require weeks, if not months, to gin up. Saudis might have an easier time of it. And same with the Straits. The Iranians control, with their medium and long-range missiles, the ability, they don't need to control the Straits with ground forces. All they got to do is intimidate insurance companies and tankers. And if anyone is envisioning escorts, destroyer escorts, that reduces the amount of oil that is going to pass through because it's a slow, extremely deliberative process. So the world economy, I think, global economy is in for months of challenges, not just weeks should the president decide to end the war.
Let me end with this. We just have a couple of minutes. We talk a lot about reshaping of the world order. And we had the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney made this speech at Davos earlier this year, called on middle powers to stand up in the face of a changing order. Got a lot of attention for that speech. When you have the United States doing what it's doing right now, where does that leave not just middle powers like Canada, but the rest of the world? I mean, can you chart that new path, or are you just bouncing along in the wake?
No, I mean, you have a lot of respect for your prime minister. He's really smart, and he's really stood up. But when we talk about the world order, what are we really talking about? The last 5 weeks, you've seen 3 countries, essentially threaten and shape the quote-unquote international political and economic environment. There is no world order. And I think yes, middle powers are extremely important. But the great powers, the ones who have the capacity and who act in ways for good or ill, seem to me, including the United States, still retain extraordinary ability to shape matters. And as far as the Middle East is concerned, by and large, based on almost 30 years of working in government and another 20 plus, it's a place where American ideas on peacemaking and war making more often than not go to die. It devours transformations.
That's not a particularly optimistic place to leave the rest of the world in some ways.
I'd like to do better, but I'd be misleading you and wasting your time. It's a cruel and unforgiving world out there. What it lacks is leadership. And I don't know how to bring that back. The men and women who participated in this system, roughly from the end of the Second World War until the early 80s, not just in the United States, with all their transgressions, imperfections, they're not coming back. And the circumstances that produce them are no longer available.
It's always good to speak with you. I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Aaron David Miller is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment. You've been listening to the Current Podcast. My name is Matt Galloway. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.